Hi there, everyone, and welcome back to the Happy Meter podcast, the podcast where we talk about striking a balance between our life's passions, joys, and financial wellness. Coming to you, I'm Kevin, a happy teacher myself, finding that balance, and joined with my co-host and co-founder, Justin and Garrett. We're continuing a tradition that's kind of new for the Happy Meter podcast, where we're bringing on a special guest who has a particular perspective, expertise, and insight that we think will really benefit you, our listening community, and I'm not going to lie, me as well. Justin, could you introduce our special guest, please?
Yeah, I'm really excited about today, Kev. I'm really excited to welcome Dan, who is a former teacher. He's a teacher advocate and father, and he founded 403bWise.org, which in my opinion is one of the greatest teacher retirement resources out there. I use it all the time when I don't know something, or if I have a client that needs some more practice or instruction on something. He speaks on a weekly podcast called Teach and Retire Rich. And he has a book that's named the same thing. He's just an awesome guy. And I've had the pleasure of being on his podcast. And I've learned so much from him and his podcast partner, Scott. And I'm just so honored to have Dan welcome and join us here today to talk a little bit more about teacher retirement landscape and specifically the 403b. So Dan, welcome aboard to the Happy Meter podcast.
Dan Otter, welcome.
Hey, Justin and Kevin. It's great to join you. Love what you guys are doing. Justin, you were an awesome guest, and you're just the kind of teacher we love interacting with. And Kevin, I just met you, and I can already tell you're the kind of teacher I love interacting with. So thanks, guys.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much, Dan, for coming. Justin, you might want to get us started right away, because I know we have a lot of important content that we want to probe Dan's brain on.
So Dan, can you actually just start for just a quick little elevator speech here? What brings you to the table now here after your kind of long storied career of just doing so many wonderful things to advocate for teachers and so that they have and could have an awesome retirement?
Oh, well, that's a great question. Many, many years ago, way back in 1992, I was a first-year elementary school teacher. And the kids had left for the day. I was frantically trying to get ready for the next day, as new teachers do, when all of a sudden a woman appeared at my back door and she poked her head in and she said, "Do you care about your financial future?" Now that is a jarring comment to get in your classroom, right? After you've just been dealing with, working with fourth and fifth graders. I actually had a combination class my first year, unbelievably difficult. She steps in and starts talking about retirement plans that she has available. I had never heard of these. She was talking about things called TSAs. I politely listened. And I said, look, if I'm interested, I'll get in touch. I did not get in touch. Over the next couple of years, I started self-educating myself about saving for retirement. And I learned that she was selling high-cost variable annuity products in something called the 403b. Now, I was familiar with the 401k, but I had never heard of the 403b. What I also found out was this was common all over the country. Teachers were getting ripped off by these sales agents selling high-cost products. They weren't selling Vanguard, TIAA-CREF, T. Rowe Price, Fidelity, these lower-cost companies. I also found out a lot of my colleagues had sold these products. So finally, in the year 2000, I launched the website 403bWise. The whole goal, education and advocacy. We want to be a place where teachers can come, learn about the 403b, and then we also advocate for better, lower cost choices. So fast forward to the year 2016, the New York Times ran a series of articles on the K-12 403b, and it opened up the problems with this plan to just a huge audience. And lucky for us, a gentleman named Tim Ranzetta, who runs Next Gen Personal Finance. If you have any teachers listening that want to teach personal finance, Tim and his group, Next Gen Personal Finance, make available awesome free personal finance curriculum. He reached out and he said, hey, I am horrified by how teachers are being ripped off. The very teachers I'm working with to teach personal finance, I just found out are being ripped off in their supplemental retirement plan. How can I help? So thanks to him, 403bWise became a nonprofit in 2019. I left my job at the university level to run this site full time. So that is a quick, hopefully, introduction to about 20 years of 403b advocacy.
That's an impressive elevator speech, Kev.
Oh, I'm blown
He's got it down.
And I got to say, I find it so inspirational to be with you, Dan, but also Justin, who's a little earlier in his path. But to know that I think we who get into teaching, we're not trying to become arbitrarily or quickly wealthy or anything like that. And many of us don't even have a head for numbers. And often, too often, teachers get taken advantage of. So to have the two of you in this space on this call, sharing your wisdom, because you want to protect those very people who we are seeing now more than ever are truly essential to this country. It's a wonderful thing to share this moment. You also mentioned, of course, 403b. I benefit from a 403b, and I know extraordinarily little about it. Could you, Dan, maybe lead us on kind of a quick talk about what is a 403b and who typically has access?
Sure. Great question. So a 403b is very much like the 401k. Most people have heard of that plan. That is for for-profit employers. You work at Apple, you have a 401k. In the K-12 public school space, you have a 403b available to you. And that is just a supplement to your pension. Most teachers have a pension. This is another way to save for retirement. And it works very much like the 401k. You can contribute the same amount this year, $19,500. If you're over age 50, you can do an additional $6,500. The big difference, though, is in addition to being it for a public sector employee, is costs. Most 401k plans offer usually one or two well-vetted vendors. In the public K-12 space, that's not the case. Typically, you have at least a dozen choices. The overwhelming majority are those type of products that woman tried to sell me all those years ago in that elementary school classroom when I was a first-year teacher.
So yeah, Dan, it's interesting that different types of clients that I have to come in, because I work with a lot of young professionals, and a lot of folks with 401ks, they come in, there's only one option. It's typically always a low fee type option. They almost always have access to very low cost types, index funds and mutual funds in those accounts. But it's amazing, anytime that I work with a teacher or sometimes even a nonprofit, someone who comes in, I have to sit here and go through 5, 10, sometimes 20 options for them to look through. And what's interesting for me as a teacher, I have seen those salesmen come all around. I was actually hooked into buying a whole life insurance plan, which is another subject. I avoided the 403b at the time. But what's interesting is I look all around my school, and almost every one of my staff members has had one of these or has one of these high fee type plans. And so if you don't mind me just sharing a little bit, like, why do you think this exists, and that our school and our teachers who are working so hard every day have to kind of navigate these really murky waters, versus oftentimes a 401k is not the same way?
Yeah, I think it's actually three reasons. I think it goes back to history of the creation of the plan. The 403b was actually created in 1958. It predates the 401k by 20 years. And when it started, only annuity products could be sold. So the insurance industry got its meat hooks into this plan. And then in 1974, something called ERISA was passed, the Employee Retirement Income Security Act. And this was a set of rules that employers had to follow they had to be fiduciaries to work in the best interest of their employees as far as the type of retirement plan they offered. For some reason, the K-12 403b was not included in ERISA. So like your employer, Justin, they do not have to put out a request for proposal and pick the single best vendor. They basically let any vendor into their so-called vendor list who meets minimum standards. So that's the second reason. It's historical context, it's ERISA being non-ERISA. The third is we aren't, as teachers, I always consider myself a teacher, we are not taught this in our credential programs. Right. And that is something we would like to see. We'll talk later about, we do educational events, free educational interactive events every week. Mm-hmm. If you have anyone listening who is affiliated with a credentialing or certificate program, we would happily do free interactive events for teachers. We want to get to them before the sales agent in the classroom, in the staff lounge, often bringing sandwiches or food gets to them. So I would say those are the three main problems with the K-12 403b.
Right. So if I'm in a 403b, or I'm looking for the possibility of supplementing, and contributing towards a 403b, what should I be looking for?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm going to name a couple companies, several companies. If one of these companies are available, chances are you have a good option. And if you're in California, CalSTRS Pension 2. CalSTRS is the state pension agency, and they identified a problem in the K-12 403b at least a decade ago. So they created their own low-cost 403b. Teachers in California I believe pretty highly of CalSTRS, so it's a known name. So if you're in California, look at CalSTRS Pension 2. The other companies are Fidelity Investments, and I want to point out it's not American Fidelity. We often get emails from teachers saying, "Oh, we've got that good company you guys recommend, American Fidelity." No, Fidelity Investments, the Boston-based mutual fund company. ICMA RC is new in the space. They are long time in the 457 plan, and that's a whole other supplemental plan also available to teachers. Maybe another podcast we talk about that.
We'll get you back on about that, Dan.
Yeah, and I'll probably mention it a little bit on like solutions too. Tia Kref also goes by Tia now, is excellent. T. Rowe Price, Baltimore-based company, is fantastic, and Vanguard. And then there's one other company that has an interesting approach. They're called Aspire Financial Services, and they're on a lot of K-12 403b vendor lists. They are like a window to Vanguard, to Fidelity, and you only pay a small fee to access them. Now, ideally, you go directly to T. Rowe Price, directly to Vanguard, but Aspire can be a really good option for a nominal fee. It'll give you access to these companies. One word of warning. A lot of these insurance companies will say, "Oh, we have Vanguard, we have T. Rowe Price." They do, with a massive, expensive asterisk. They sell an expensive insurance layer on top, which can add about 2% in fees. So you might get a Vanguard account through an insurance company. You could be paying 2 to 3% in fees.
Yep.
You go directly with Vanguard, you guys know, 0.2%, 0.15%. In over 30 years, that is hundreds of thousands of dollars that hardworking teachers lose out on.
Right.
Just out of curiosity, working with so many Baltimore city teachers, those companies that Dan just mentioned, how many times do you see city teachers knowledgeable enough or perhaps lucky enough to be doing business with those companies as opposed to something that might be taking advantage?
Yeah, it's interesting what Dan said. One of the issues is that a lot of teachers don't know when they come in, right? And so the only people that are going around and actually selling products are typically the bad vendors out there. So I typically see a New York Life insurance person or a MetLife person come around, or an AXA person, and they come around with their suits and they bring in their food to the lounges. They bring in gift cards and raffle them off at different professional developments. But those are the folks that are coming around and selling the products. And if I'm a teacher who's dedicated my whole life to serving kids and may not know a lot about the finances, if I have someone that comes in who's willing to help me, who I think I should trust, that's typically who and what gets signed up for. But what's interesting, in the Baltimore plan, there is one option that's a low cost option, which is the Vanguard option, which is $5 flat a month, plus the expense ratio of the fund, which can be like 0.04% to 0.15%. So you're talking about just pennies on the dollar. And so the issue is that there's no Vanguard rep, there's no Fidelity rep, there's nobody coming around and selling this. You have to actually know and be educated on this, which is a hard thing. And that's what I think what Dan's trying to do with his podcast and with his book. And I think that's what we're trying to do in a lot of ways, Kevin, is to get the word out. Like, because it's not very natural around our schools that we don't see a Vanguard person selling. Would you see the same thing around the country, Dan?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, those are the emails we get again and again. It'll say, "Oh, I found your podcast. I found your website. I'm one of the people that fell for the AXA rep. AXA has now changed their name to Equitable, or named the insurance company." And what really is kind of heartbreaking is they feel like they did something wrong. They feel betrayed as well. Here they are, as you mentioned, hardworking teachers dedicating themselves to students, and they think they're doing the right thing. Oh, and that's the thing too. In the staff lounges, they present themselves as financial experts, financial advisors. They're not. They're salespeople. They're not certified financial planners. They're not fiduciaries. So I would say most people come to us after they've had a very bad experience. We get so happy to help them, but we also get happy when we get the first year teacher. I didn't sign up. I did some Googling. I found you. It looks like it's good that I did before I signed up for that with that person coming into the staff lounge. So it's super common. And I always tell teachers, don't beat yourself up. You did not know what you didn't know.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting, Dan, you just mentioned a first-year teacher coming in, and it's always an amazing thing when a first-year teacher comes in, and before that they start getting involved, they can make that decision right away. Now, let's just say you're a teacher who's been doing this for a while, 5-10 years in, and you've been contributing to AXA. We see that all the time. What are some either resources for that teacher to go to, or what would you suggest that teacher possibly do?
Sure. Yeah. I'll go ahead and give you some steps, and I'll give you some resources. The first step is to see, do you have a better option? If they work where you work, Justin, they have a better option. They have Vanguard. So let's just use that as an example. What I would do is stop the monthly contributions to the bad company. Let's say it's $200 a month, $300 a month. Send it to Vanguard. So now you know right away your money is working harder for you. More of your money is now going to your retirement. You have the peace of mind that you're in one of the best companies available. Then take a look at your current vendor. Here's what's so insidious. Chances are there are surrender charges. And it's not just, let's say you've contributed for 10 years. It's not like, and a lot of them last for 7 years. But it doesn't, they're on a rolling basis. Every new contribution locks that money into a new 7-year threshold. It is just infuriating. So find out how much of your money is subject to a penalty. Often it's about 5%. And one way is just transfer the money that's no longer subject to penalty. But we also meet plenty of teachers that maybe they have 20,000. That's a lot of money, but they're so angry. They just want to rip the Band-Aid off and get the money out of that company and move it over. That's an individual choice.
Right.
We can help you. There's several ways we can do it. We have a very active Facebook group, the 403 bWise Facebook group. We're up to 1,500 teachers now. Justin, you're an awesome active member, providing great suggestions and feedback to teachers. Go ahead and post there, and you can get a lot of feedback from our community. We have a story on 403bwise.org called How to Get Out of a Bad 403b. Okay. So that's sort of best case scenario, that you have a Vanguard. Let's say you don't have good choices. So I used to say, go to your employer, and I've now changed my spiel. I now say, build an army, get more teachers on your side. Because when you go as a one, I hate to use these war analogies, but like sort of attacking a wall with one person, you're a sitting duck. Build an army. If you start telling colleagues that they are losing out on $300,000, you're going to get their attention really quickly. We have a special advocacy section on our website where we have PowerPoints you can use. We've produced a video that's 4 minutes and 3 seconds long. I kid you not. And it really, I think, introduces people in a short, succinct way to the problem. Share that with a colleague. Have a colleague watch that. Then go to your benefits official. We also have charts showing the fee difference. Justin and Kevin, I'm sure you guys are very aware of these kind of things. That is very powerful to say to a benefits official, our teachers, including you, because you're also a contributor, are losing out on hundreds of thousands of dollars. We're not asking you to get rid of all those other vendors. I think that would be great, but that's a big lift. We just want you to add Vanguard. How about Aspire that gives us access? So that's what I would do. And if they still say no, and sadly, we have met plenty of teachers that the door, metaphorically gets slammed in on their face. The next thing I would say is, do you have a 457B? It turns out more fiduciary requirement is required of the 457. So you often have less vendors, better vendors. And in states like New York, teachers are able to contribute to the state-based plan. New York deferred compensation has $23 billion of assets under management, firefighters, police, government officials. So you have this huge base of assets. They have a index fund charging, like, I kid you not, 0.00 4. It is like one of the smallest fee structures I've ever seen. So often a 457B can be a better option. Plus, for your fire crowd, a big advantage of the 457 is, let's say you're young guys like you guys, and I hope this never happens, but you leave teaching, let's say at age 40. Typically, if you access your retirement plans, you're going to have to pay a 10% federal penalty. You don't with the 457. You still pay taxes. That is a huge tool for fire crowd, or when you change employers, it's a nice emergency fund. I have a 457 when I taught middle school in Montgomery County Public Schools outside of Washington, D.C. And it's sort of always been my, emergency fund because I had left the employer. I could access it at any time. So I guess those would be my suggestions.
So a few things, Dan, I wanted to jump on about. The first, for all the Baltimore listeners, because we have a substantial amount of our audience are Baltimore City teachers, the 403b option for us, I vetted all of them. Without a doubt, is the Vanguard option. It's about, again, it's $5 a month. That's where all my money goes for a 403b. And then there's a small, very tiny expense ratio based on the fund you choose. On the 457 range, we don't have too much of a low cost option like you would see in New York. My whole family are teachers in New York. My dad's worked for a prison system in New York. My brother's an employee in the state of New York. They all have the 457. They call the deferred compensation. All wonderful. And I've got a lot of folks I work with up there. But in Baltimore, if you're a teacher, there's not the lowest model out there. There is one 457 that's through Plan Member that if you do it directly without having to go through an advisor, you can get a fund fee around 0.35% plus about $50 or $60 a year. So not bad. And I fill that bucket as well. It's the lowest cost option there. And specifically for our firefighters and teachers out there, firefighters and police officers out there, if you are possibly thinking you're going to retire early before 55, 59 and a half, that 457 could be a really powerful weapon for you to bridge that gap between you retire at 44, 46, 47, and when you can start accessing kind of those later retirement funds later on. So that 457 for a lot of police officers that may only have to put 20 years in, who start at 21, who could end at 42, can be a powerful, powerful weapon. And we had an officer on here, I think episode 9, Kevin, who was talking about his pathway to early retirement not too long ago. And he has access to the New York 457, and he's been now crushing that, hitting the 19.5 a year. When he's done at 41, 42, he'll really have a beautiful access of funds there. So I appreciate you bringing that up. Now, Dan, one more thing. I'm still a little confused that the difference between the Vanguard option and let's just say the high fee option, what types of fees are involved in that 403b that is bad? So we've heard things like the surrender fee, the normal expense ratio, and then the mortality fee. Would you mind kind of breaking those up?
Sure. So if you have a variable annuity, there are at least 2 fees you're going to pay. The first is called the mortality and expense fee. And the sales agents will tell you, look, this is how you guarantee your contributions. So this is what happens. Let's say you teach 30 years. Let's say you contribute $100,000. And somehow, year 20, year 30, it'd be terrible. You pass away and the balance is less than your contributions. That 1.25% protects the difference. So let's say you contributed 100,000, your balance is 95,000. For all these years, you've spent an enormous amount of money, 1.25% a year, to protect really a small amount of money. So that's the first one. And that really is what's going to pay the company and the salesperson. Think about this. This is fee 1, and we're already over 1 basis point. Okay. 100 basis points, we're already at 1.25%. Then you have the underlying investment. So let's say you want to pick an S&P 500 fund. You want to pick a target date fund, all very, garden variety, run-of-the-mill stuff. I've seen them as high as 1.5%. So now you're at 2.5%. Okay, we've seen them as high as 3%. Then you add in that surrender charge, and the whole surrender charge game is to keep you with that company. So they lock in. Super frustrating. One thing I forgot to mention, and this is especially, I think, beneficial to young teachers, if you have no good choices, your employer won't change and offer a better choice, you don't have a good 457, I think the Roth IRA often is a really good choice for a new teacher. You can only contribute $6,000 in 2020, but for new teachers, that's a heck of a lot of money. And the beauty, as you two know, with the Roth IRA, you want Vanguard, you could open one with them tonight. You want T. Rowe Price? Same thing. It's not tied to your employer.
So Dan, my buddy here, Kevin, he funded his first Roth IRA about 4 months ago. And we celebrated on our podcast. Filled that baby up, all Vanguard funds, just crushing it.
Yeah.
Kevin?
Nice.
Big deal, big step, feels great.
Yeah.
I was just reflecting though also, and getting to sit back here and listen to Justin and Dan, to both of you guys, talking so specifically about pitfalls and things to be mindful of, the first year teacher, but then also, name checking very worthwhile companies like Vanguard that you all believe in. But I find myself still thinking about that first year teacher, to borrow Dan's word, the sort of insidious structure that so many good people fall victim to. And then also this notion of building an army. And I think I have sort of three things that come to mind. One that's new to my mind right now is, I think as teachers and I think in general working people, we need to break ourselves free of the taboo about talking about money and talking about saving, because you can't build that army without first at least being open about your concerns, anxieties, goals, all that kind of stuff. And then hopefully we find a Dan Otter, a Justin Garritt, someone who also has a little bit of that money mindset and the drive to go and find it. Then the two other things that come to mind about the just philosophical first steps, I know Justin has said, first is, if you're like me, you should probably go out and find a fee-only fiduciary advisor, like someone who's going to guide you and support you. And I know, Dan, you've used the word fiduciary as well, that legally binding responsibility to be taken care of. Or if our listeners are like you guys, they got to go out and really learn and study, because we do not want any of our listeners or anyone in the communities of our listeners falling victim to the insidious game.
Dan, I want to just share with you a little bit about the Baltimore landscape and what I typically see. Because again, we probably have a few hundred folks or so from Baltimore here that listen to this. And so I work with these types of folks a lot that come to me with New York Life, AXA, or MetLife. And if you add those two expense ratios that you just mentioned together, the expense ratio plus the mortality fee, we typically see that those folks are paying between 2.5 and 2.74% every year, plus the additional $30 that they charge in an administration fee. So if that's the case, where if somebody has $100,000 in their account, every year, that is a little bit more than $2,500 that person would be paying in fees, right? With the Vanguard option, it's depending on your fund that you choose, but it could be like 0.04 all the way down to, it's very little. It's like, again, pennies. And plus only $5 a month. So like on a $100,000 plan, my typical fee would be only about $160 a year, 160 compared to $2,500. Now on top of that, when folks come to me and said, I'm in a bad plan, then they have to pay a surrender charge when they go and escape it. So they're paying $2,500 on $100,000 a year being compounded down. On top of that, when they go to leave, they're going to pay 9% of that amount to be able to move it. Your own money that you worked hard on, versus when you have a Vanguard option. And it's all based on knowledge. And so, Dan, that's what I just love about what you're providing for folks, is because your stuff is totally free. You have a Facebook community that I've learned so much on, and now I get to give back and contribute to folks on there. There's a ton of financial advisors on there giving great advice. You have your book out there, and on top of that, your podcast, which I love and enjoy, is on there, all free for folks. And so I just love that. Is there any other resources out there for folks that they should be thinking about that you provide?
Sure. So, I'm glad also, again, Justin, so appreciative of your help on our Facebook group. And Kevin, to your point about the term fiduciary, we have a resource on our webpage. It's on our homepage called Working with an Advisor. And on there, we have a list of the 20 questions everyone should ask an advisor. We also have resources like where you can find the good planners, the fee-only planners. But we also have a fiduciary pledge that you can download and have your advisor sign. Those people in the staff lounges, some of them might lie and sign them, but they are not fiduciaries. And even my pod partner, Scott Downhauer, has gotten people who have downloaded our fiduciary pledge and given it to him to sign, which I think is just, when that goes full circle like that, I hope you start getting those too, Justin. I mean,
I've gotten 3.
Great. I love this.
Yep.
This is fantastic. So again, it's really, the website's sort of like the home base for what we do. We have an education section within there, everything about the 403b. We have basic investing information. We have information on the 457. our probably our most popular piece of content right now is a 403b 457 side-by-side chart. I'm a visual person, humanities guy. I love seeing it in a chart format to see the differences between and the enormous similarities between these two plans. So that's our education section. I mentioned the advocacy section. That is where we've got just so many tools that we are free, we want people to use. And then it's the community piece. It is the Facebook group. And anyone out there, we want you to join, but be sure to answer the 3 questions. The third one is, do you sell financial products? And we've had to deny people because they haven't answered that. We are trying to keep advisors off of that, people who are these high commissioned advisors. So there's that. I've got a couple of videos there. And something I love doing is almost like what we're doing here is our weekly events. We generally do them on Wednesday or Thursday night at this time, 4 to 5:15 Pacific. We use Nearpod. We try to make it interactive. And the real benefit of these is my partner, Scott Downhauer, because he's a fiduciary planner. I do the presentation and he answers the technical questions like, Justin, you could do. So for like 25 minutes, people get to ask a planner anything. So I would say those are our main resources. Ones that aren't affiliated with us, download Publication 571 from the IRS. That is the governing document for the 403b. Also, the state of California has a superb resource that anyone in the country could use. It's called 403bcompare.com. Every 403b vendor in California that sells product in the K-12 and junior college market has to make all their fees available through this website. So a teacher in Michigan gets a hold of us and like, what is equitable charging? Oh, let's go to 403b compare. But again, you got to look in 2 places for the fees. You've got to look at the fees and charges, which include the mortality expense, then the underlying investment that you were talking about, Justin, that gets you to that 2.74%. So I would say, and I think you were very kind also to mention our podcast, the Teach and Retire Rich podcast. I have to say on that name, it's intrinsically rich, right? You don't go into teaching to be a millionaire, billionaire. You go in there because you love kids and it's rewarding. And because there's a lot of retirement plans available, if you do it right, you can have a comfortable retirement. That's what we're all about. It sounds like that's exactly what you 2 guys are about. And you are doing amazing work because, you are getting the young teachers' ears and the young investors' ears. What you're doing wasn't available when I started getting into this. So I have a feeling we're going to have younger people more educated earlier because of stuff like what you guys are doing. So I want to tip my cap to you guys too.
It has been such a pleasure talking with you, Dan. Thank you for giving up so much time. I've learned so much. And you've actually, in that last moment, kind of reinvigorated me in even this work, let alone the vocational work of being a teacher. And so for me, as the lay person who doesn't know too much, thank you both, Justin and Dan, for sharing your wisdom. Justin, any final comments you want to say?
I just want to thank Dan again for his time tonight out in California. We're ending the night here. It's almost 8 o'clock, and I had my first day with we had a parent orientation right before this for my students for the year, and we're kind of just getting into the mix of things with students. And so it was a pleasure to kind of end the day with you today, Dan, and thank you for the work you do for us. And I know for me, I wish that I saw your resource at 22, 23, but I'm glad I found it at 30.
Well, again, we're so glad we can help teachers. And again, I said before we went on the air, I have always had so much admiration for teachers. I did the job for over 12 years. I know how hard teaching is. This is an unbelievable environment you are teaching in, and teachers all over the country. So you are in our thoughts, and I know you guys are going to rise to the occasion. But man, I just, again, have so much admiration for all the teachers across the country right now.
For all our listeners out there, thanks for checking in with the Happy Meter podcast. Make sure after you listen, go out there and find Dan Otter, check out 403bWise, find him on Facebook, podcasts, and continue to find a way to strike that balance in your Happy Meter. Thanks, everybody.